Dragging a judge out of a church wasn't on anyone's rundown that morning. Yet, under the heat of the studio lights, the order came anyway. Security. Please escort Judge Judy from the stage. Joel Osteen said it quietly, no raised voice. No anger, just the smooth certainty of someone used to control. But even a whisper can split a room when a camera's red light is on. The band froze. The audience, primed for a pleasant discussion on forgiveness and leadership, leaned forward as if they'd misheard. The control room chatter stuttered into silence. Only the clock above the teleprompter kept ticking, its second hand carving the air between two worlds, before the order and after it. Judge Judy didn't move. Her hands rested on the table, her pen still uncapped, eyes steady behind half-moon glasses. "Are you sure that's the sermon you want to preach?" she asked, soft, surgical, the kind of question that lands like a gavel. Gasps rippled through the audience. The moderator blinked at his notes, searching for a lifeline in the script that no longer existed. Behind the glass wall, a producer mouthed, "Keep rolling." The moment hadn't come from nowhere. For 20 minutes, the talk had flowed like warm honey. Osteen speaking about grace and leadership, about keeping doors open and hearts unguarded. Judy had listened, nodding, the faint smile of a woman waiting for the cross-exam. Then she'd asked a question that tightened every jaw in the room. "When a leader talks about open doors," she said, "should that include questions that make him uncomfortable?" It was polite, precise, but the pause that followed it told the truth. The room had tilted. Osteen's smile held for a beat too long. He adjusted his cufflink, glanced toward the floor manager, and the audience sensed a tremor beneath the velvet. That's when he gave the order. 2 security officers appeared at the edge of the set, their movements slow, uncertain, as if they themselves doubted the script. The camera on the jib arm drifted wider, capturing the tableau: a pastor, a judge, a room divided between reverence and disbelief. Judy didn't stand. "You invited me here to talk about accountability," she said, her voice level. "This is where it lives." The audience murmured, half shock, half admiration. The producer whispered, "We've got something real." For a heartbeat, even Osteen seemed to feel the weight of its difference between authority and power. He lowered his hand slightly, signaling the guards to wait, and that was the second everything changed. The cameras zoomed in, the lights sharpened, and what began as a comfortable interview about faith became a live television reckoning about truth, control, and the line between them. The audience didn't know it yet, but this confrontation would echo far beyond the studio walls. Because when a preacher tries to silence a judge, the question that lingers isn't who's right, it's who's listening. If you believe conversations should stay open even when they get uncomfortable, subscribe right now. Tell me in the comments. One word, faith or control, which one speaks louder in this moment? The silence that followed could have stretched for hours. Cameras kept rolling, but even the mechanical whir of their lenses sounded intrusive. Somewhere behind the glass, a director's hand hovered over the button for a commercial break, yet no one dared cut away. Moments like this didn't wait for permission, they burned their own path. Joel Osteen leaned back slightly, hands folded on the desk, the calm of a man trying to reclaim control of a storm he'd accidentally called down. "Judge," he began, voice smooth again. This was meant to be a conversation about grace. Judy's response was a scalpel. "Grace doesn't need guards, Pastor. It needs courage." Gasps rippled through the audience again, softer this time, more like an exhale than a shock. People weren't sure if they were watching a theological debate or the unmasking of something deeper. Reporters in the press row scribbled furiously. One whispered, "She flipped his sermon." Osteen's smile didn't break, but his eyes betrayed the calculation behind it. He turned to the moderator. "Perhaps we should refocus. This is a place of faith, not confrontation." Judy didn't look at the moderator. "Faith," she said quietly, "is confrontation the moment you stop pretending you've got all the answers." The room held its breath again. Osteen's fingers tightened slightly on his lapel, a flicker of irritation breaking through the pastoral calm. The floor manager gestured to the security team still waiting by the curtain, but Osteen waved them off, forcing a gracious smile. "We all stumble," he said, tone shifting into preacher's rhythm, "but grace allows us to rise without judgment. And accountability," Judy countered, "keeps us from falling again." The audience applauded spontaneously, this Timon prompted human, raw. The moderator tried to steer the discussion back to safer ground, but the story had already changed direction. What was meant to showcase serenity had turned into a trial of sincerity. Behind the cameras, a producer whispered into her headset, "Ratings are going to explode." Another replied, "If we make it to the end." Osteen tried to pivot, recounting a familiar anecdote about forgiveness and criticism, his voice warm, polished, steady. But Judy's eyes never left him. "You teach people to forgive," she said softly, "but do you let them question?" He blinked. "Of course," he replied, "as long as they do it respectfully." "Respect," she said, "isn't silence dressed in Sunday clothes." The studio fell, still once more. It was no longer about theology. It was about truth's temperature, how hot it could get before someone reached for the thermostat. Osteen took a slow breath, clasping his hands tighter. The cameras zoomed in on the beads of sweat forming at his temple, catching the strain behind the smile. Judy sat unmoved, her composure turning into quiet defiance, a mirror held up to power without a hint of malice. What no one realized then was that the next 5 minutes would decide the entire narrative. The public would either see a preacher restored or a preacher revealed, and as the clock hit the 12-minute mark, the hum of the lights grew louder, the tension denser, and every eye in the building turned toward the man who'd just learned what happens when control meets conviction under live television lights. If you think truth should never need permission to speak, comment courage below. And if you're here for stories where power meets principle, subscribe right now. New episodes every week. The air in the studio was dense enough to taste. No one blinked. Joel Osteen leaned forward, hands folded, eyes calm but unreadable, the still surface of water, concealing something shifting beneath. Judge Judy, he began, I believe in dialogue, but this feels less like a discussion and more like a verdict. Judy didn't look up from her notes. A verdict needs evidence, she said, finally raising her gaze. Would you like to see yours? The control room crackled to life. She's got material, a producer whispered. Another replied, stay wide, don't miss this. Osteen smiled faintly, the expression of a man who thought he'd seen every trick. I'm sure whatever you've brought, Judge, will be enlightening. Judy slid a thin folder across the desk. Its tabs shimmered under the light. She didn't rush, she didn't have to. The silence worked for her. When she spoke again, her tone was even, almost gentle. In a sermon from last spring, she said, you told your congregation that criticism is an invitation for reflection, that a leader who silences a question has already lost the message. Osteen's smile stayed, but his jaw flexed a fraction of a second, almost invisible. The audience noticed anyway. That was context, he said softly, smoothing the papers in front of him. Context, Judy replied, isn't an eraser. A murmur rose through the seats. The moderator shifted uncomfortably, glancing between them. The two security guards who had hovered at the stage edge quietly stepped back, realizing this wasn't a conflict they could solve. Judy tapped the folder once, deliberate. Your own words, Pastor. You said, a question isn't an interruption. It's the sound of someone still searching for God. Gasps scattered across the room. Phones rose in the crowd like fireflies recording. Osteen blinked, taking in the moment. His voice, when it came, was calm, but heavier. We all say things in one spirit and later find them used in another. That's why we write them down, Judy said, so we can live with what we preach. The band remained silent. No music could smooth what had just happened. Behind the glass, the director whispered, don't cut. This is the pulse. Osteen leaned back, exhaling slowly, searching for footing. Judge, he said, my ministry has always been about hope. And hope, she said, can't exist where honesty isn't allowed to breathe. That line landed like a verdict. The audience applauded, not the polite kind, but the involuntary kind that bursts out when tension finally finds release. Osteen nodded once, dignified, though the strain around his eyes betrayed something deeper, a man realizing that words, once spoken, can return as witnesses. For the first time since the show began, he didn't speak. He just stared at the folder between them, the printed echo of his own voice, while the lights burned hotter and the cameras zoomed in for the shot that would headline every clip before the night was over. If you believe truth doesn't fear playback, hit subscribe right now. And in the comments, tell me what's more powerful, words or actions. Your answer might show up in the next episode. Joel Osteen straightened in his chair, regaining the rhythm that had once carried him through thousands of sermons. His voice found its warmth again, the practiced cadence of comfort that filled arenas and living rooms alike. Grace, he began, his tone measured, is the gift that meets us where we fall. It's not earned, not argued, it's received. The words rippled through the room, a familiar balm after the storm of confrontation. Some in the audience nodded, relieved to hear the melody of his ministry return. Others, those who'd seen the shift, leaned forward, waiting. Because when a man defines grace after nearly silencing a question, the air itself listens for honesty. Judge Judy tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. Grace sounds generous, she said, but does it excuse everything? Osteen smiled, a small, careful curve. Grace doesn't excuse, it restores. Then why, she asked softly, did it try to remove me? The studio froze again. The control room chatter died instantly. Even the clock above the teleprompter seemed to hold its breath. Osteen blinked, recovering quickly. You misunderstand, Judge. That wasn't about exclusion. It was about maintaining peace. Peace, Judy replied, without accountability isn't peace. It's decorum. A producer mouthed wow behind the glass. The moderator lowered his head, letting the conversation unfold like a courtroom he no longer controlled. Osteen's charm began to thin, replaced by a more deliberate calm, the calm of someone stepping carefully through a minefield. Judge Judy, he said, I admire your pursuit of truth, but sometimes the way we ask questions can close hearts instead of opening them. Her reply was immediate, clean as a blade. And sometimes, she said, it's the answers that close them. The audience gasped once more. Then came silence, the kind that makes words sound heavier when they finally break it. Osteen clasped his hands tighter. The cameras caught it. A microsecond of strain behind the pastoral smile, behind the glass. A producer whispered, "He's losing the rhythm." Another answered, "She's steering now." Osteen tried to reclaim ground. "Grace teaches us not to fight fire with fire," he said, voice dipping into preacher's cadence again. "We can disagree without division." Judy leaned forward, voice quiet but firm. "Grace also teaches us not to hide behind kindness when truth gets uncomfortable." A murmur of applause spread across the room, small at first, then growing. The tension that had stretched for nearly half an hour began to pulse with new life. People weren't just watching a debate anymore, they were watching a test of integrity unfold in real time. Osteen nodded slightly, perhaps conceding the point, perhaps buying time. "You make good television, Judge," he said with a hint of humor, trying to soften the air. Judy smiled faintly. "And you make good sermons, Pastor. But the truth still has the floor." Gasps again, this time tinged with admiration. The director whispered, "We've crossed into history." For the first time that night, the lights felt less like spotlights and more like judgment in forgiving, equal, absolute. Both sat in it, knowing there was no turning back to small talk or scripture sound. The confrontation had evolved into something larger than either of them. A question about the weight of words and the cost of comfort. If you believe grace and truth belong together, hit subscribe now. Drop one word in the comments, grace or accountability, and tell me which one this moment really showed. Joel Osteen inhaled slowly, the way a man does before stepping back into familiar ground. He had been here before, under pressure, under scrutiny, and he always had a story to soften the edges. His voice lowered, tender now, the preacher in him awakening. "Let me share something personal," he said, eyes glimmering under the lights. "Years ago, after one of my early sermons, a woman came up to me in tears. She said my words made her feel seen again. That's what grace does, it lifts, even when we don't deserve it." The audience leaned in, lulled by his tone. The rhythm of redemption, soft, melodic, reassuring. He had found the melody that made millions listen. But Judge Judy didn't blink. "Did you ask her why she felt unseen in the first place?" Osteen paused, just long enough for the moment to fracture. "Well," he said gently, "sometimes pain doesn't need a reason. It just needs relief." Judy folded her hands. "And sometimes relief without reason just numbs the wound instead of healing it." A low hum of agreement rippled through the room. A few audience members clapped softly before catching themselves. Behind the glass, a producer whispered, "She turned his story into evidence." Osteen smiled, thin now. "Judge," he said, "you see things through the lens of justice. I see them through mercy." "Justice and mercy," Judy replied, "were never meant to compete. They balanced the scale." The sentence landed like a quiet thunderclap. Reporters typed furiously, capturing every syllable. The control room cut to a tight two-shot, Judy's poise against Osteen's polished restraint. It looked less like a panel show and more like a parable unfolding in real time. Osteen tried again, voice steady but losing its warmth. "Grace means giving people the benefit of the doubt. And truth," Judy answered, "means not pretending doubt is a virtue." The band didn't dare play a note. Even the moderator sat motionless, realizing no cue card could steer this anymore. Osteen exhaled slowly, forcing calm. "You've built a career on judgment, Judge, but my message is love." Judy's tone didn't waver. Love isn't afraid to judge what's wrong. It's afraid to ignore it. The audience erupted gasps, scattered applause, the sound of something real breaking through rehearsal. Osteen leaned back, fingers tapping the table once. His practiced serenity cracked barely, but enough for cameras to see. He wasn't losing his composure. He was losing control of the narrative. Behind the glass, the director whispered, "Hold, let her drive this." The lights pressed hotter. Sweat gathered at his temple. Judy, perfectly still, seemed untouched by the heat. "You see," she said finally, her voice almost kind, "stories move hearts, Pastor, but accountability moves history." The sentence floated in the air, heavy and holy. Somewhere in the audience a man whispered, "She's preaching now." For the first time all night, Joel Osteen had no story ready. If you think stories mean nothing without accountability, hit subscribe and join the community that values truth over theatrics. Comment one word, truth or love, and tell me which one you think carried more weight tonight. The studio had turned into a cathedral of silence. Every sound, the flick of a pen, the buzz of a light seemed to echo. Joel Osteen sat straighter now, the performer in him replaced by the pastor who knew when to turn to scripture. When charm fails, truth or what sounds like it becomes the last refuge. He opened his Bible, pages soft from years of travel. "There's a verse I've leaned on through every storm," he said, voice low but deliberate. Ephesians 4:32, "Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as God forgave you." The audience exhaled together, the familiarity of the words breaking the tension. For a brief moment, it felt safe again. Redemption was back on the table. But Judy Schindlin didn't close her folder. She didn't smile. "Beautiful verse," she said softly. "But forgiveness doesn't erase accountability. Pastor, it earns it." The calm cracked again. Reporters perked up, fingers flying over keyboards. The control room camera zoomed slowly on Osteen's face. Catching the faint wince, he tried to hide behind a smile. "I agree," he said smoothly. "But forgiveness begins when judgment ends." "And judgment ends," Judy replied, "when truth begins." The sentence sliced clean through the set. The moderator, who had been quiet for nearly half an hour, opened his mouth then closed it again. He knew better. Osteen tried to steady the rhythm. "Sometimes," he said, "the best thing we can do is let go." "Sometimes," she countered, "the worst thing we can do is pretend letting go is the same as making it right." Gasps. The audience wasn't sure whether to cheer or pray. The control room producer whispered, "She's rewriting his sermon live." Judy leaned forward slightly, her tone softening but her words sharpening. "You teach forgiveness," she said, "but I wonder, does it apply to the people you silence too?" The question landed like thunder under velvet. Osteen blinked once, caught off guard. He tried to recover with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Judge, I don't silence anyone." "You tried," she said. "You just didn't expect them to stay standing." Applause erupted this time and prompted. Honest. Loud. The room vibrated with it. Even the floor manager dropped his headset slightly, mouthing "unbelievable." Osteen looked down at the verse still open before him. The words were there, clear and unchanging. But for the first time they felt like a mirror rather than a shield. He took a deep breath. "Judge," he said quietly, "you've made your point." Judy nodded once. "No, Pastor," she said, voice calm as dawn. "You made it years ago. I just read it back to you." The audience fell completely still again. The light above them hummed halo bright. The room wasn't angry anymore, it was awake. Behind the glass, the director whispered, "That's it. That's the moment." The camera held the shot, the preacher, the judge, and the silence between them, thick with something holier than applause. If you believe faith without accountability is just theater, hit subscribe right now. Comment one word, VERSE, or voice which one do you think spoke louder tonight. For the first time that night, Joel Osteen didn't look like a man hosting a show or defending a sermon. He looked like someone thinking about what it costs to be misunderstood and what it costs to deserve it. The lights pressed hotter. The clock above the cameras blinked 10:42. He exhaled, the sound quiet but heavy. "You're right," he said finally. "I did tell them to remove you." The words broke the air like a crack in glass. Gasps moved through the audience like wind. Even Judge Judy seemed momentarily still, her pen motionless above the page. Osteen continued, his voice lower now, stripped of polish. "It wasn't about power," he said. "It was about fear. I've spent my life trying to keep the peace in every room I walk into. When things get heated, I shut the door. That's my reflex." Judy studied him for a long moment. "Peace," she said softly, "isn't the absence of conflict. Pastor, it's what you build after truth is spoken." He nodded, eyes flickering down. The cameras zoomed closer, catching the raw honesty beginning to surface the cracks in the calm veneer of the most practiced smile in television. "I know," he said, almost to himself, "but when you stand in front of millions, you start thinking about perception more than people." "And that," Judy replied, "is when leadership turns into image management." A low murmur rippled through the room. The moderator looked up, sensing the change. This was no longer a duel. It had become a confession. Osteen's tone deepened. "I didn't mean to silence you," he said. "I just didn't want another moment that divided the audience. The world's already divided enough." Judy leaned forward slightly, voice softer now, compassionate but unyielding. "Division isn't caused by questions, Pastor. It's caused by the fear of them." That sentence landed with a kind of stillness no applause could fill. The control room fell silent to every producer knowing instinctively that they were watching something no network could script. Osteen looked up, meeting her eyes. "You're not wrong," he said. "I've preached openness for years, but sometimes I forget that openness also means being willing to be challenged. And grace," Judy added gently, "means not running when you are." He smiled this time, genuinely. "I deserve that," he said. The audience chuckled lightly, the tension easing for the first time in nearly an hour. It wasn't laughter at his expense. It was release and exhale after the storm. Behind the glass, the director whispered, "Keep rolling. Don't cut. This is grace in motion." Osteen straightened his papers, not to end the conversation, but to steady himself. "Judge," he said quietly, "thank you for not leaving." "I wasn't staying for applause," she replied. "I was staying for honesty." He nodded, eyes glistening under the lights. "Maybe that's the sermon I should have preached tonight." The audience erupted into applause not for victory, but for the sight of two people who stopped performing long enough to mean it. If you believe real power is found in humility, hit subscribe and be part of a community that values truth over image. Comment one word, honesty or control, and tell me which one really won tonight. The applause faded into something softer, a silence that didn't demand sound, only reflection. Joel Osteen sat back in his chair, shoulders lowered, the gleam of the stage lights replaced by the quieter glow of surrender. Judge Judy watched him for a long moment, her expression unreadable yet kind. "You know," she said, her voice almost a whisper, "people think strength means talking over others, but sometimes it's the silence after the truth that does the teaching." Osteen nodded slowly. Maybe that's the message tonight, he said, that the mic doesn't make you right. The audience chuckled gently, then fell silent again, this time not from tension, but respect. Behind the glass, a producer wiped a tear discreetly. The director whispered, "Hold the shot." Judge Judy gathered her papers, then looked at him one last time. "We all preach something," she said. "The real question is whether we'd still stand by it when someone reads it back to us." He smiled, eyes lowered. "You just gave me my next sermon." Judy nodded. "Then make sure it's one you can live with." The lights dimmed, the cameras panned out, and the audience rose not in frenzy, but in quiet applause that sounded more like prayer. Two figures, once framed as opposites, now shared the same stillness, the preacher and the judge, both humbled by truth, both learning that conviction and compassion aren't rivals, they're reflections. And as the show faded to black, one line lingered longer than any applause. When faith listens, even confrontation becomes sacred. If this story moved you, subscribe for more moments where truth speaks louder than noise. Comment one word, faith, if you believe real strength is listening, not shouting. And remember, every conversation you face this week, keep the door open, because grace only walks through doors that stay unlocked.